See Devin and yeah, okay. They both. All right. Hope we don't have no technical difficulties. That's always a bitch. Awesome.
All right, guys.
Welcome.
How the
Howdy there,
fuck do I
motherfuckers.
turn off my face here? Damn it. I don't know how to
All right,
work
so you guys ready to
technology.
start this?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm your moderator. My name is
All right.
Devin Hill, and today we've got ourselves a debate between Jesse Grant and Bobby. Bobby, what's your last name?
Jones.
Okay, Bobby Jones. Jesse Grant versus Bobby Jones, y'all. And I would like to let y'all know, I would like to keep this civil. So no bullshitting, no getting out of hand. And Jesse, is there anything you'd like to start to talk about right now?
No, I'll hand the opening statement over to Bobby.
All right.
Well, shit. All right. Uh, well, it's kind of hard to start out of just the justification for socialism. Do you have like a specific question?
Well, my specific question to you would be like, what issues of capitalism like do you most particularly find problematic? Because obviously, like, all problems with capitalism. I don't think that I don't even think you'd be able to say that socialism could rectify or provide a remedy for all of those solutions. So, and I know you're probably not saying that socialism is perfect, but what problems in particular are you saying that socialism could render?
Well, the first problem of capitalism is the problem of runaway inequality. And this is sort of like the trend of runaway inflation. If you have a disbalance of power between two individuals or whole groups of individuals, it's likely that the one group that has more power will be able to exploit that power for future power. And that, leads to growing trends of wealth and income inequality and a growing prioritization of the interests of a few at the very top over the interests of the entire public. And that's one problem that I think is inherent to a competitive hierarchical system when you're talking about a space with finite resources, but individuals are allowed to accumulate an infinite number of resources. Of course, that's going to lead to growing inequality. Of course, that's going to lead to an increased oligarchical presence. That's the first one. And I think it's very simple how socialism would defeat that problem. Like if we just democratize big business, for instance, the top 500 largest companies would no longer be owned by that corporate interest that prefers short-term profit over the entire public's interest. So by democratizing business and by dispersing the power over resources, workers have a greater ability to improve their own life conditions and their own wages and their own benefits and vacation time and so on. That's the first one. And then the second big problem I have with capitalism is just it really does value the property form, and it really does value profit over everything else, including culture, including human life, including our national institutions and our politics, and everything gets corrupted by the profit motive. And that doesn't mean the profit motive wouldn't exist in socialism, but when the profit motive is contained in the hands of so few individuals, of course that profit motive is going to be more aristocratic. It's going to be more interested in benefiting those at the top rather than everybody else. So to me, it's just like it's the end goal of human social evolution. We democratize the political system with political democracy. We democratize the social realm with political liberty, which is an egalitarian concept. And the last realm where we need justice and fairness is in the economy, where there's still an incredible amount of exploitation. So, all right, that's it.
Yeah. So okay, exploitation. All right. So I want to respond to a few of these points here. Well, or rather, would you make me, would you rather me make a more like a pro-capitalist statement and like retort to that?
You can do both if you want. It's your response.
Sure, sure. So, yeah, I'll just go ahead and start with like a, just a blanket pro-capitalist start. I think a lot of socialists ascribe a certain morality to their economic positions. Like this question here, that says like, like how do you juxtapose like greed or whatever with your moral beliefs? I think a lot of socialists do this. I'm not particularly interested in that debate of having like morality or an ethics discussion. That's for the morality and the ethics debaters. That's not what I'm here for.
Wait, but
And
isn't that kind of the point of politics, though? Can I just interject that one thing? Isn't that kind of the point of politics for us to apply ethics to our social lives? Like,
well,
isn't that the heart of our priorities when we're discussing political issues? We're talking about human ethics.
well, I think to a degree, yeah, you'd be somewhat correct, but I think that more so, it's not for the sake of ethics. It's more for the sake of, you see, like I personally, I don't know if this would apply to you. I would assume it does as a socialist, from a more utilitarian perspective of just simply making X thing better. You want to make like the worker, the plight of the worker better, and you want to improve conditions in that regard. And I respect that. I would agree with that. I wouldn't agree with socialism, but I would agree, obviously, in improving worker conditions and making life better for them. But as a blanket utilitarian perspective, yes, I would agree that yes, we are here to do policy and to do politics in order just to simply make people's lives better. But I don't think that's specifically to the ethics point.
Okay. Um, am I going to respond, or do you want to finish, or is there? I don't
Well,
know that.
yeah, I just assumed that was like a quick little interjection in which like you were
Yeah,
kind of
that
confused
wasn't.
about something.
I was. It was just a quick interjection. I just.
Right.
I'm like, I understand your priorities here. I'm just saying that's really what politics is. It's all about human priorities. It's about what we care about and what we don't.
And
So
I'm not here to completely disregard like ethics or morality. Obviously, I'm a very moral person. I would like to think. Some people might disagree with that, but I'd like to think that I
I like you a lot,
generally
buddy.
have my. Oh yeah, well, thank you, brother. I really appreciate that. But yeah, I tend to think I have my morals right, so I'm not like disagreeing that obviously we should do what's good for morals and ethics, and we should act within those bounds. But I don't think like most actions are done just in that regard. So, for example, if you take out the trash and it just so happens to make you feel good about like oh well, I did something really responsible. You didn't take out the trash just because like, oh, what makes me feel responsible. You took it out because it needed to be took out, and the house is going to smell like shit, and it's just not good to have it in there. So I think from a utilitarian perspective, we need to make things feel good. And so yeah, that would be my contention with that point. But yeah, to
Okay.
continue with what I was saying, I think that a lot of socialists do in fact do the ethics and moral thing. I'm not here to do that because that assumes one person is more moral and one person is not. That's just messy, and I don't want to have to do that. But from my perspective, as I don't know if I would say I'm a quote unquote capitalist, I call myself a distributist or whatever. I'm in favor of wealth distribution, and I'm in favor of remedying some of these problems with as you said, runaway wealth inequality. But my question to you, as a socialist, if you concede that there's going to be a profit motive under socialism, inevitably, if you spread out wealth anywhere, you can't do it equally. And I'm not saying you're trying to have everybody have equal outcome. I know that's like a reactionary straw man. But I'm saying, like, obviously there's going to be some people at the bottom and some people at the top. It's just a matter of, like, how low is too low and how high is too high.
Yeah.
How do you define that?
Okay. So let me first off say that what my response to this is going to be arbitrary. And any response to a political question is arbitrary because there's even like property itself is just a fickle man-made concept. So it's all based on arbitrary constructs. But my idea is the absolute bottom line. And I don't necessarily believe that this should be like a mandate, but this should be like a minimum the absolute bottom line should be everyone should have basic necessities met. Because I don't believe that it's productive or helpful to just let people, continue to stir in their own misery, I guess you could say. It's not good in terms of providing productivity and Are you there? I might have been cut off from the internet here.
No, no, no. I just had to mute. I hope you don't mind. Do you mind like repeating some of what you said?
Yeah, I have to repeat it because I didn't hear anything and I kind of got thrown off.
Hell,
Right.
even
So
I
where?
thought the internet went out.
Right. So what I was where I was at with you is that you said property is a man-made arbitrary concept, and you believe most of what you're going to say is going to be arbitrary.
Yeah. So this is the first arbitrary principle. I think that human needs should be met. And the reason why is because I think there is no point to allowing people to fall below the basic standard of living. It's not helpful. It's not a necessary incentive to get people to work. You can incentivize people in positive ways. And it wastes human interest or human potential because thousands of people die, deaths of deprivation, or millions actually worldwide, and tons of people don't get the education and the help that they need to be successful contributing members of society. So I think that should be the bottom line. In terms of no, I don't think income inequality should disappear, but I don't think that it should grow indefinitely, right? And I think
Yeah.
that the market form will set up the proper distribution of income inequality, even under a market socialist system. Because, for instance, if every business got democratized, you would still have to pay skilled laborers more money for those skilled labor positions. So I think that, in fact, in a market socialist system, there would be a more puristic market definition of labor pricing, because there wouldn't be a private profit motive sort of suppressing the value of other people's labor. So instead of that, the market would actually sort out people's wages in a much fairer way. And I'm guessing there'd be inequality, but that inequality would be almost like what you see on like a bell curve, right? Rather than
Yeah.
all of it being skewed up to the top, there would be the median and the average wage would be similar. The median and the average wealth would be similar.
Yeah. 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 Sure. So I mean, I don't disagree with the fact of meeting human need. Obviously, I believe that basic needs definitely should be met. I'm a strong supporter of the safety net, and I believe that we should cover those most basic things. Right. I'm
Mm-hmm.
totally on board with you there. But my issue is so you said property is arbitrary, and right. So I'm not here to say property isn't arbitrary. Obviously, a lot of things are. Even our language is arbitrary. But the thing is, I just want to ask you, as a socialist, why do we have property? Do you believe property inherently exists to, do all these bad things, or what's the deal with that?
No, I don't think okay, so I understand the appeal of property to a conservative, or to a capitalist. The appeal of property is it provides a stable foundation, like a stable organization for society, without forcing the individual to be beholden to the collective interest, right? So that is
Yeah.
a great that's a great system in some ways to promote individual autonomy and liberty. So I understand the positive argument for it. I'm just saying these natural trends of runaway wealth and income inequality, when you combine that with the short-term profit motive, sort of trading that for long-term sustainability and the maintenance of social interests and the maintenance of society, all of that is not something that has to take place. So it's I'm not opposed to property. I'm just opposed to property being used as an excuse for an oligarchical system to take place.
Okay. I think that's pretty fair. But yeah. So I'm glad that you said you're not completely against property, you know, that's a relief because like I used to be a communist, and I'm tired of having those discussions with people, and so it's a lot more fruitful and a lot more intelligent to have, you know, intelligent conversations with intelligent people. So I respect that. Thank you. But I just, you know, I just really don't understand, you know, some of where this is coming from, because this is almost from a narrative that property, you know, doesn't seem to be a very, you know, interpersonal concept, that it's impersonal. And I just simply don't agree with that. And that it's, you know, for the individual, and it's, you know, like me against everybody and fuck you. I'm not saying like that's necessarily your position, but it, you know, sort of comes off that way. And my issue with that is that I feel that, you know, when we, like, I obviously have a problem with wealth inequality, but my answer, you know, to all that is like, not necessarily like, how do we put more money in the pockets of people, but how we just simply make those goods cheaper. Like, we've got plenty of money going around, like wages are going up, and we are seeing, you know, some change happen, you know, for people, and some people are being better off in this, you know, in this economy. Maybe they were better off 2 years ago. Who knows? But, you know, people obviously are going to vary, and most poverty is actually going to be, you know, pretty temporary. It's not going to last forever. Multiple studies have, you know, suggested this, and I could send you some of those afterwards. But yeah, like a lot of this stuff is, you know, just, I understand like it's a big problem. I obviously have a big problem with poverty, and I don't want anyone to go through that. I think we should end it. But you know, I guess I just really have to ask, like, you know, like, is it really so much about like, you know, getting away from the concept of like charging all these people all this, you know, ridiculous amounts of like stuff? For example, like
Well,
rent. You know, when we
yeah.
charge people rent, like usually when it's at a high price, it's because they, you know, it's supposed to reflect the people buying those houses. For example, when we do like, you know, when this is a pretty controversial thing, but when we gentrify, you know, certain communities, you know, those houses are going to get renovated, and unfortunately, you know, a lot of Latinos and African Americans are kicked out because, you know,
Well,
we see massive generational poverty with those people, and those
yeah.
houses do get renovated, but ultimately, in the long run, other property becomes cheaper, and other people's rent does become cheaper as more people move in and move in. And my question to you is just like, with all this production undergoing, like productivity is not at all-time high. Like our workers, you know, they're really being productive, and I think we should give something back to them. But my main question here is, why not just simply produce more and run these costs down instead of, you know, just trying to just give, you know, people more means to do it? Like, it just seems
Um,
kind of, you know, counterproductive that way.
okay, so I will say this is the reason why, in my mind, because actually we are a developed country. We are well past the point of, you know, the Wild West where there's places that have been yet to develop. Pretty much all the market share has been taken up. There are no consumers that are left out of the market. I mean, there's people that are priced out, but there's no consumers that are left out of the market. This is a highly developed economy that works with very, very different dynamics. And I don't think that the priority of a society with as much combined wealth and income as what we have should be just to accumulate wealth. I think it should be to use the wealth we have more efficiently and more in a way that is focused to produce better social and human outcomes. So, you know, I think that as far as development is concerned, I mean, you look at the average GDP growth, and it's been declining for years, and it's because we are a developed country. And it's not that I'm against growth necessarily. It's just that I don't think growth is a method for improving the human condition in developed countries is very efficient. In underdeveloped countries, yeah. You know, in a place that's underdeveloped and, you know, you want to get international companies to move in, I guess having a capitalist free market system might work really well for a little bit. But once you get to the point where you're as developed as the United States is today, all that competition just really leads towards a sort of a funneling of wealth and income to the very top. I think that we could provide far better social outcomes to people and not trade much in terms of productivity or innovation or creativity And I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't be doing that. Like why should we not be improving the human condition as much as we possibly can? If that makes sense. Why is it why do we have to rely on growth? Why do we have to rely on systemic reform when we could just totally change the system and build one that actually reflects the interests of everyone? So I guess the question I have to you, and I'll ask you a question on this,
Sure.
is if property are you like, do you think of there's any sort of property limit that should apply? Do you think anybody should actually be prevented from making more than a certain amount, or accumulating their wealth beyond a certain amount?
I think that we shouldn't be, like, obviously, I don't think we should be overproducing, but I don't think that's, that's more of a legislative matter. I don't believe that. I think that's more of a matter to be handled with the company. No.
Okay, so well, if it's a matter to be handled with the company, then there's no limit because companies are gonna prioritize profit for the capitalist class, and
Right, but
that's
when they do that, the prices isn't necessarily going up unless they have achieved a monopoly, in which I would argue for, legislative action against that. But I just don't really see an argument here for, you said that money is being funneled to the top. So I haven't really seen an argument that says, like, when we funnel money to the top, like, are capitalists really misusing this money? Like, I don't really see any strong arguments for capitalists being, all this stupid, because
But
like a lot of
it's not that they're misusing it. Let me clarify this really quick. It's not that they're misusing it. It's just self-evidently bad, because when you have a middle class share of income declining, that means that the middle class's purchasing power goes down. When they take more money, that means it becomes more difficult for regular Americans to afford basic standards of living and pay for the things that they need to and want to have like a decent, comfortable middle class life. So it over the past 40 years, for instance, we're 90% more productive today per capita than what we were 40 or 50 years ago, but we've seen like a 7% increase in the median wage. 40 years before 1980, the median wage rose with productivity. So it's just self-evident, that it's not that they're misusing it, it's just that they're using their money in ways that further increases their share of income, and using it in ways that improve their lives more and more over time. Which means the rest of society gets neglected. And this is important because it's not like you were talking about the personal nature of property, right?
yeah,
um, Property is personal, but it becomes a whole lot less personal when you're a billionaire and you've got thousands of workers working for you, or millions of workers working for you, maintaining your property and your assets. It becomes a whole lot less about your own individual autonomy and a whole lot more about you having dictatorial control, when really those workers could elect a CEO that's probably just as smart and capable of running the business as you are. It's not a necessity for people to have this kind of dictatorial ownership. So it begs the question of why even do this if it means that the rest of society is neglected.
interesting. So yeah, like I'm just having somewhat of a difficulty understanding this. So you're arguing that people are being like massively neglected by these billionaires. I think billionaires, they're not the greatest people, obviously. I don't really, I'm not a huge fan of billionaires, and I think a lot of them do allocate their money, and not in the
It's
business
not
sense, but
it's not a personal attack on them, by the way. It's an attack on the system itself. It's I'm not even saying that the billionaires themselves are neglecting it. I'm just saying that their position leads to social degradation, because when you have that kind of concentration of wealth in the hands of so few people, it means that a very few people, a very small group of people, have just a gigantic amount of resource power, of political power, and cultural influence. So it's not that it's just that I don't think that that is healthy for a society that's trying to look out for the interests of everyone.
right. But here's just the way I'd like to think about it, right? So you think of a guy, like think of a really fat guy that buys a lot of food. So me. So you see this guy, he's a really big sumbitch, right? He's got all this food. He's just throwing it all over the ground. He's going to eat a bunch of it, not off the ground, but he's going to eat a bunch of food that he's got. He's got all this food lying around. And there's rats that come in and eat it, and they're eating pretty big. And the rats, they're not trying to throw this fat fucker out because they are getting fed, and they're getting fed quite a bit, even though that the whatever's left on the ground is minuscule compared to what the fat motherfucker's eating. So my question is that, like, if people are truly being neglected in this massive way in which the system is, juxtaposed against them, my question is why aren't there like, mass riots and stuff? Like, I understand that people are hurting.
Propaganda runs deep. Propaganda runs deep. That's why people don't really know about this stuff. I mean, do you hear this stuff being talked at? Like, does the mainstream media point out on a daily basis that, like, billionaires own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans? We don't hear about this. Voters are actually, like, it's manufactured consent. It's literal manufactured consent where people are just oblivious to the reality of the situation and think everything's fine because their living standards haven't necessarily deteriorated. Some people's have, but most people's haven't deteriorated. The fact is, though, we're so much more productive as a society, and we've seen wages and wealth and just the overall quality of life expectations stagnate at the same time. So it's what was that question again?
Yeah, so my question is, if there was mass neglect, why isn't there like riots and shit?
Yeah, so it's I don't think that it's because there's not mass neglect. I just think it's because people are sort of under the boot of propaganda from the government and from corporations, and they've been forced to settle with this kind of stuff. I mean, how long did people live under oppressive feudal systems before they finally revolted? It's just how propaganda works. I mean, it's really, really powerful.
Right, but here's the first of all, I'll tackle the feudal point because that's just the newer argument, right? And I'll get back to what you said about like the propaganda. So about the feudalism, my issue with that point is under feudalism, there wasn't nowhere near as much transparency with the government, and people, quite frankly, didn't have access to the government because the government didn't tell them shit. And the government, while in many ways I would argue they are secretive to us, and obviously, they lie about their war crimes and shit like that. They are a lot more, open these days than they previously were, than like obviously under like a monarch.
Well, yeah, but how many people know about those stats, those actual like wealth and income inequality stats, or like unions have been gutted?
I would argue a lot of, like, actually the overwhelming majority of the country would know this because, like,
I really don't. I mean, like, a large amount of the country doesn't even know like some of our most important presidents. I just don't.
Well, yeah. I'm not going to deny that most Americans are pretty ignorant about a lot of things, but the overwhelming majority of voting Americans support like higher taxes on the rich. So if they don't see this concentration of wealth as a problem, like, how could that be? If there was all this like mass propaganda, like, don't you think that'd be like obviously like billionaires don't want to be like taxed all this massively amount, depending on the billionaire you're talking about. If it's Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, that's a different story. I'd say that's an outlier. But the thing is, I think the overwhelming majority of people, like, they realize, and they have like a basic, even when I was a communist, I argued this, they have a basic consciousness, like class consciousness, where they say, hey, like, all these rich people are actually fucking me over. Like, I don't think there's an overwhelming majority of people that's really all that loyal to the rich. Like, even QAnoners, Republicans, will say like a lot of bad things about people like George Soros and like Bill Gates, who are part of the top 1%.
Well, I mean, you look at the popularity of socialism, and it's been going up, especially with younger Americans. And younger Americans are most neglected by this because growing income and wealth inequality leaves the most vulnerable workers out. And obviously, the most vulnerable workers are entry-level workers. So younger Americans are entering into an economy where the bottom line wages are a lot less than what they used to be, or at least, adjusted for inflation. And the cost of education and housing and healthcare is significantly more expensive than what it used to be, adjusted for inflation. So, there is an increasing radicalization and an increasing resentment amongst the American people. But I think a lot of people just don't see the nuance. Like, America hasn't formidably changed towards dystopianism yet. We're not dealing with the effects of climate change as much as what we could. We're not dealing with the effects of income inequality to the point at which it's actually stagnating our economy and starving aggregate demand. We're not dealing with all that right now. So people are kind of just content with the normalcy of it, despite the fact that it's really much worse than what it could be, and it can only get worse from here. So I just think over time, as the problem gets worse, I don't think right now the material conditions are right at all for socialism. Like, I would think 20 to 30 years from now at least, before the people are actually angry enough and before the system has become dystopian enough that it seems like that's the only solution. And before then, it's possible that there's social democratic reforms that are implemented that completely tamp down the desire for socialism among the masses. So, it's not that there's not resentment. It's not that there's not wrongdoing. It's just that we're noticing these trends at their very beginning point, in their earliest stages, and it's only going to get worse from here. And I'm advocating for preemptive or progressive change to prevent problems from happening before they even start.
Okay, so here's a few things. You made a point about young people being, more supportive of socialism, and that's particularly worse on them. I don't see how you can make that. And this is not to say like, oh, well, boomers, had it, so like horrible and stuff. I'm not making that argument. I do think that young people, as far as the wealth goes, they do have it pretty bad. But I would argue that young people in any period of time have it better than old people by default, because if you take a look at a young person who's working minimum wage, even below minimum wage, but it's recognized to be a, like you and I both live in the South, so below minimum wage job would probably be like Waffle House. I assume you have some of them over there in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Waffle House. But
Mm-hmm.
anyways, so somebody who works below minimum wage, even a young person who's like that or is minimum wage, can have, they have so much potential versus like an old guy who sits on $1 million like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders isn't going to produce much wealth any longer because he's old. Wait, what?
I just sneezed and said shit to cover it up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, but a young person who's working below minimum wage would have more, potentiality there, because that young person who's working minimum wage can go from a lot of things. For example, Fred Turner, who was once just a regular fry cook at McDonald's, he became the CEO of McDonald's. So you really don't know where anybody's going. Some of the, and this is not to say like all billionaires or millionaires are like from ground up. Obviously,
No,
like the
no, but
majority of billionaires aren't, right? But like, here's the thing though. Like, there's just so much potential there. Like, I just don't know how you could say that for any young person.
well, for young people today, I mean, you're not just look, it's people aren't thinking about their potential. They're thinking about living their life in the present and enjoying their life. Life shouldn't be a race, to a certain point. It should be enjoyable from beginning to end, because it's a very short amount of time that we have on this earth, and every second we waste doing unnecessary toil when we could have some of these barriers sort of softened, if that makes sense, and still be just as productive and well off as a society. It's just a waste of life, in my opinion. But I think young people have it worse, not just because of the cost of living and because of the wage issue, but you also have to remember the geopolitical issues that we're dealing with. I mean, young people overwhelmingly believe in the science of climate change, and most young people understand that it's an existential threat. So you're in a world where you think that we're literally cooking ourselves,
Yeah.
and at the same time we have an increasingly dystopian economic system that rewards more and more to the very top. And as far as yeah, you never know where someone can be, but chances are, I mean, if you're being realistic, you're not going to become a billionaire. Chances are, if you're being realistic, you're probably not going to even become a millionaire. Chances are you just have a shot to live a life that the average American does. And if the average American's life standard is stagnating, that's a problem for all regular Americans. So, I think that we should definitely have a society where we encourage personal initiative and personal success, and where we prioritize uh, up, I guess you could say, subsidizing individual creativity, or at least ensuring that it's protected, and we don't squander human potential. But I think it's pretty clear that younger generations are increasingly dissatisfied with the current system. And like, you look at the declining American dream. I just posted about that a little bit ago. Like, the percentage of 30-year-olds that are making more than their parents has gone down dramatically over time. And the percentage of people that own their houses has gone down dramatically over time. This is all leading to a trend of, fuck, it's hot in this room. This is all leading to a trend of, like, our lives becoming just more and more hollow uh servitude things. Like, I don't know how to say that. Like, basically, we exist to serve. We exist
Right.
to serve the profit interest. We exist to serve the system. We exist to serve our bosses. When life is so much more important than that, and there's so much more to life, I think, than that.
But yeah, and as somebody that greatly values culture, I would agree with you that, there is certainly a lot more to life than, strict commerce. I not disagreeing there. But my main issue is with some of these, claims about, like, for example, you brought up that young people are not making as much as their parents. That is true, and I find that to be a problem. But I just kind of really curious about this. So, like, you're talking about how much people are getting paid their income. I don't think income is like that great of a way to measure people's wealth. And when I'd like discuss people's, potentiality as young people, it's more so about the cash they can grab. For example, for about like 6 years now, I've been working under the table for my dad. Uh, we technically have a quote unquote farm. It's a stonemasonry business. And I've made a lot of money into that business. But the thing is, I don't have any reported income. And it's impossible to truly know my wealth unless you were to go through and, count the money in my cookie tin. But, the
Yeah.
point is, we see wealth based on how much people are buying and how much people are producing. As I've stated before, there's record productivity in America. A lot of the things that weren't accessible back then are easily accessible in the line to get checked out at Walmart even. Headphones, like 10 years ago for a Walkman. I don't know if Walkmans were a big thing in, 10 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago that was true. But headphones, just to plug them in, that was a pretty, big luxury back then. And, like lots of these things, I'm just simply arguing, a lot of the way we can actually deal with this wealth inequality is just simply make these products cheaper. And the way you do that is you maximize your outcome. And I think ultimately by doing that, you take care of your people. But I don't think, taking care of your people and having a strong safety net and giving them benefits, involves democratizing assets. I don't think that's demonstrably provable, to solve like these problems of capitalism. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't really see any evidence for that. And I just really like don't see why
Well,
like any of these issues need to be addressed by specifically that, diagnosis.
okay, well, the question is not that. I mean, I guess you could address the issues with a social democratic approach, and you wouldn't need socialism. But the question isn't do we need socialism to address it, but rather is socialism the best possible system to address it? And I think it is. It's not to say that we need it necessarily, but it's pretty easy to understand how democratizing at least like for instance, I don't think we should democratize all business. This is why I call myself like a market socialist distributist. So
Sure.
basically I want a certain point, like say $100 million for all business shares after that point to be awarded to workers by like say a 60% rate until workers get a majority share and then get to run the company democratically at the point at which it's worth like $1 or $2 billion or something like that. This is the top 500 companies being democratically run. It's not to say that that's necessary to solve the problem, but imagine how much good that would do towards solving the problem of reducing wealth and income inequality, of reducing the corporate interests being looked out for as opposed to the entire public interest. Imagine how much good that would do to reduce the corruption in government by getting the political money out of the hands of very few people and dispersing that power. Majority of people, I assume a majority of workers, believe that climate change is real, for instance. One of those problems that I think is pretty well connected with the short-term profit motive over long-term sustainability under capitalism. Um, the majority of workers believe in that, and it's very unlikely that if we get the teeth out of that corporate monopoly by democratizing big business, that big business is then going to stand in our way to prevent climate action or political reform or any of the many major progressive goals we want to get accomplished. So it's really just about recognizing that there is an insanely grotesque concentration of power and just preventing that. That doesn't mean that I'm against entrepreneurship or I'm against people starting businesses. I'm totally okay with that. But for the largest businesses, I think one of the greatest ways to get rid of or take the teeth out of a lot of these negative effects of capitalism would be to democratize. It's not to say that's the only solution, but I think it would be one of the biggest steps towards doing that we could make.
Sure, sure. So yeah, like if that's the way you feel, that's totally fine. Uh, I would disagree with you. I don't really see any evidence that socialism itself, would solve those issues. I personally take issues
Well, you
as
don't
I
you
know.
don't see that democratizing big business would reduce wealth and income inequality and prevent that kind of runaway wealth and income
Right, but like that that
inequality.
would that would have to assume that that's what capitalism is for. Ultimately, any system is not meant to maximize how well people are doing. That's my personal goal. I want to do that, but that's not necessarily why capitalism is put in place, and that's not why we think it
No,
works.
but capitalism naturally leads towards that. It's something that has to happen in a developed country. If you have a competitive hierarchical system like the one we have, and you have individuals that can claim an unlimited amount of property, once that imbalance of power gets started, it's going to just grow and grow and grow without restriction. So if we regulate it out, yeah, we can regulate it out. True. You can implement social democratic or distributist reforms to regulate it out, but you don't see how democratizing big business would work towards at least a lot of the income and wealth inequality reduction.
But here's my problem though. Like, I don't really see a problem with people at the top owning as much as they a little bit more than poverty. I'd really like it if there was no poverty. But the thing about capitalism is it was never, meant to disperse any of that or, even quote unquote be all that better. Like it's progressive than feudalism, obviously. but it's not to be like better for, like humans. It's just meant to like maximize, outcome. And that's ultimately my argument. When I said earlier that, like taking out the trash, you may enjoy like not smelling that in the house, but it's just generally good as a, good thing. And I think capitalism covers that as well. And that people materially benefit, when we advance capitalism, and that you see like, obviously the capitalism in America is a lot more beneficial for people than like the capitalism in Africa. And I think, like, yeah, the more and more we advance and the more and more, like you said, like we're developed. And a lot of these products are becoming more readily available. Wages are, in fact, going up.
No, whoa,
And
whoa,
people
whoa,
are
whoa,
benefiting
whoa,
from
whoa.
this.
But see, this is the problem, though. Under that's the trends point in the opposite direction, that actually wages are stagnating out in developed countries, not just in the US, but in other like European developed countries. Now we're seeing
So what
growing
do you mean
income
by like, what do you
inequality.
mean by stagnating? Because I hear lots of socialists use that like differently amongst themselves.
Okay, so middle class share of income in the United States has actually been declining over the past few decades, which has led to not necessarily a total stagnation, but if you look at the median wage increase over the past 40 years, it's like 11%, whereas the median wage increase before the 40 years before that was close to 90%. It's not necessarily that it's down to zero, it's just that our economy has mobilized from a pretty like socially responsible, a rising tide lifts all boats economy where the people living in poverty and the middle class saw their incomes rise the most, to an economy where the top fifth percentile sees by far the most income growth. And it's a total radical transformation from what it used to be. And it's radically different from what like social democracies across the world do. But this doesn't necessarily mean that it's not improving the human condition. It's just that it's not improving it as much as it could be, and that's a problem.
So when you say like it could be like, obviously, you want to get rid of poverty, but like I don't see like how like, and you did say earlier like the line you want to draw is arbitrary, but like if people really like have a social safety net that covers like these basic things, like pretty much what you need, like your wealth too. And keep in mind, as I said earlier, like, not what you make is not necessarily like the amount of wealth you have within your reach. And I think that's more important to, what's defining poverty. I think you're using more of the governmental definition, which I would disagree with. Uh, but yeah, ultimately, it's more about like, how much wealth people actually have access to. And I
Well, you
think
can
like
also
when we,
look at the Human Development Index in the U.S. adjusted for income inequality, and we're really far behind the rest of the developed world. We're closer to Russia and Kazakhstan, literally, than we are to Norway on that. So it's not just in terms of
but
income.
Norway is not a democratized economy. I mean, they obviously like have more co-ops than we do. Or
No, but I'm just saying that the trend of a like this is a neoliberal economy in the U.S. with fewer restrictions on the market system, at
I
least.
think I think it's a lot more mixed than that. I don't think it's necessarily neoliberal. Neoliberal would be like Pinochet's like Chile. But I'm
Well, the
nitpicking.
problem.
Please continue your point.
But I mean, there's neoliberal implementations. Like over time, we've seen the wealthy have their tax burden dramatically decrease. I mean, the share of taxes the top 1% pays is actually higher, but that's just because their income has risen so much as a share of national
Right, and it
income.
doesn't eliminate, their wealth like as much as they claim it does. And obviously, like 28% out of a million is not the same as 28% out of, obviously like $10. So, yeah, I
So,
agree with you there. But I don't think
well,
like you're bringing up Norway and human like index like companies, these countries that are ranking higher like social democracies, and I'm pretty much arguing in favor of a welfare state.
yeah, well, I know you're doing that, but what I'm saying is we're discussing whether or not this is a flaw, an inherent flaw to the capitalist system, and I think it
Well,
is in
I'm
developed
discussing
countries.
I'm discussing whether democratizing assets would actually, curb these problems as opposed to just becoming a social democracy like them. Because we are a superpower. You're right. Like we have access to the wealth, but it's concentrated at the top. I don't disagree with that, but 70% of people want higher taxes on the rich, and I don't know if that's necessarily the way to go. I think the capital gains tax obviously should be raised, but I don't know about income, because that's not necessarily, like I said, indicative of how much wealth they have. There's a lot more areas where we can get wealth out of. And I agree that it's being focused at the top, but I just don't really see an empirical argument for why democratization and actual socialism is the way to go here.
Well, I don't think it's just a matter of priority. Like I said, it's not that socialism has to be the solution to the problem of growing income and wealth inequality. It's just that it is a viable solution to it. And, I prefer a mixed socialist and capitalist market. But I think that, the reason why it's really a matter of priority, like I said, it comes down to what we're prioritizing, whether or not it's productivity and profit, or it's human interest and democratic consent. I'm not even I don't really have an objective reason for why it is the only system or anything like that. I'm just saying, I
Right.
feel like it would do that job pretty well, and I feel like it would produce the fairest possible social outcomes without actually having to go to a command economic system.
Right, but I always say this about, any ideology that comes out of a book, and this is funny considering I used to be a communist, like a Marxist, but any ideology that comes out of a book is perfect, right? And then you said I don't really know if this is the way to go, but you are prescribing to me socialism, and you do believe that it's the way to go. So I'm just really curious, why do you think that?
Okay, so I'll introduce, like I said it earlier a little bit. Basically, the reason why I think it's the way to go is because it seems to be the next natural step in human evolution, political evolution. Remember,
Yes.
at the first big step, in my opinion, was political democracy. That kind of came about in response to a pretty similar movement. The idea that it's wrong for a few individuals to have control over others without their consent, and to have, a sort of aristocratic position in society. And that political democracy is clearly an egalitarian principle. We don't have to have a political system, a democratic political system. We could have feudalism. We could have a monarchy. But we implemented democracy instead, and I prefer democracy as a system because I think that democracy produces better social outcomes in the same way that liberty does. Personal liberty is an egalitarian concept. So I think it's like the final step in human evolution. It's the idea that we've already achieved justice in the political realm. We've already achieved a lot of justice in the social realm. The last realm we need to achieve justice in is the economic realm. And I think that you can apply pretty much the same principles that you apply to democracy to economics. Like these big businesses, they would elect CEOs, sort of like we elect a president. They would elect boards of directors like we elect a Congress,
Yeah.
and they would make decisions for the company. And I don't think it would be any worse in terms of overall productivity and the overall social impact of the system. I think it would just be a whole lot better for people in general, because disparities in power lead to disparities in interest, and in whose interests are being looked out for and whose aren't. And when power is concentrated in the hands of a few, that power is used to benefit the few. Sometimes it benefits other people, but I don't think we have to do that kind of system. We can have an egalitarian system that benefits the whole of society, that maintains productivity, because I don't believe in getting rid of the market system or getting rid of property itself.
Yeah.
And it just seems to me to be like the perfect maximization of the individual liberty of capitalism and the justice and equality of socialism. At least to me.
Okay. Well, like, and I don't mean to like keep asking you questions. Like, I'm not trying to like interview. Obviously, I'm trying to debate you, but I apologize if it comes off like I'm interviewing you and badgering you. I really don't mean
Oh,
to be
you're
doing
okay.
that. Yeah,
You're
yeah,
not.
but I'm just a lot of this is like really thought provoking, and it makes me kind of curious about a lot of these things like that. You believe I really want to pick your brain. Uh, so back to an earlier point that I neglected to mention. I had wrote this down, but I forgot to say anything about it. So earlier you said that, I don't know if you remember this, but I'll remind you. You said that the material conditions is not right to have socialism. So are you familiar with Kyle Kalinske?
Mm-hmm. I
Kyle
am.
Kalinske, yes. Well, Kyle Kalinske once did a segment on Bill Maher. And Bill Maher said, if you look at, this was back in 2019 when the Democratic primary was hot. Uh, Bill Maher said, if you look at the polling, every time it says generic Democrat beats Trump, we don't need to waste our money on someone so big. I want the stock market to crash so those numbers can go up for our Democrats. And Kyle Kalinske called him a, hard ass son of a bitch, right? And, said all kinds of things about him. And, said like, why do you want people to die for just so your team can win? Well, I'm not going to say that you want people to die for your team to win, but when you said, material conditions aren't right for socialism, are you saying that things need to be worse? Because if that's the case, if that's what you're arguing, and I'm not necessarily saying that, I'm simply going to ask you, but if that is what you are arguing, you are, by definition, conceding the argument that capitalism, it is effective in maximizing people's material conditions, because why would it need to be so bad for your system to happen if things are having to be too good for your system to happen? So I'm just really curious about that. What do you mean by that?
Well, because I don't deny that capitalism is a short-term method for providing society some level of economic success is is unsuccessful. I think that can happen, but at the same time, I think that it turns into something very different from what it once was originally. And I think that the trends of growing income and wealth inequality, and like I said, the short-term profit motive being looked out for rather than long-term social stability, and rather than looking out for the climate. And I think that that's all just naturally going to build up to a situation where capitalism will seem just a whole lot less acceptable by comparison to what it is now, and to socialism.
Okay, well, yeah, I accept that answer, and I'm, glad you weren't trying to say that we need to make things worse. Uh, yeah, I'm glad that you recognize that it can be, quote unquote, short term. I think it's long term, but as long as I don't want to say like I got that from you, like as if I defeated you on some point. But I think it's great that you admit that, because it, makes you more intellectually honest. Not like having conversations, as I said before, with intellectually honest people. I really thank you for that. So we've been on for an hour. Do you want to give ending points, or what do you think? Are you just McLovin it?
Uh, I'm just McLovin it. I don't know what to say other than certainly a very thought-provoking conversation. I
Sure.
hope we can hope next time we have one we can discuss a topic that's maybe a little bit more lively.
Right.
Because to
So,
me, socialism isn't necessarily my main priority. I'm looking more towards just generally improving people's lives. And if that means social democratic reform before it means actual socialist reform, then like so be it.
well, Bobby, that's fair enough, and you know what? I respect that, and I would like to just thank you for coming on. Like, I'm glad that we were able to have this discussion. It was very good. So I'm going to give a closing argument, and you can do it as well. I don't know if it's going to be an argument, but it's more so just closing statement. So here's my thing about capitalism. As I said before, I don't morally ascribe any positions to capitalism, that capitalism needs to do this ethical thing or that ethical thing. I think capitalism is, and I don't really, ascribe any morality to it. Obviously there's some outcomes to it that can be pretty bad. Obviously, we see a lot of, decay in the generational wealth of rural Americans and Black Americans, Latino Americans. Lots of issues in that regard, and I wish it would get better for them. However, in my deep concern for the poor, I don't necessarily see an argument for socialism, other than, there is massive wealth at the top. That needs to change. It needs to come back down to our people. Well, I would certainly agree with that, but I don't necessarily think that's an argument of socialism. And the thing about socialism, what it fails to understand, or rather its proponents fail to understand, is that America is a very young capitalist country. It pretty much defined capitalism in many ways with, uh, some of our founding fathers, what they had to say. I'm not really fans of the founding fathers at all, right? I don't ascribe any morality to them either, but, I'm just simply no fans of them. But the thing is, America was a young experiment, and it's still a young country. I think we need to give this some room to grow. Feudalism had hundreds and maybe even thousands of years of just, top-down government, and it was awful. And I'm not necessarily saying we shouldn't have a hierarchical structure. As a capitalist, I would believe that. But I don't really necessarily see socialism as, quote-unquote, the next step. I don't know if this is the end. I'm not as, arrogant as that. I don't think Bobby here is arrogant enough to say that either. But I don't necessarily know where we go from here. All I know is I want to maximize outcome for the now. So, Bobby, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well, my response is no. My closing statement is,
Yeah.
I believe that whatever happens over the next several decades, the trends of growing wealth and income inequality will probably continue, and we'll probably see climate change worsen, and we'll probably see human development outcomes continue to stagnate and get worse as a matter of global ranking. And I think that whatever solution applies, the most efficient social outcomes and provides the best quality of life for the most people possible is just the best solution imaginable. And not that social democracy or socialism. I mean, the debate is I guess, not completed. But I certainly think that what we have right now is not justifiable. And I think that in the future, we will realize as automation and AI becomes a more and more important part of the economy, and as we become even more productive, you said we're a young country, and that's true, we're a young country, but we're a country that's developed a whole lot in a very short amount of time. And we're actually now seeing rates of GDP growth each year, declining, and we're seeing sort of a settling of American society. And we're not seeing the necessary steps for societal development, like the actual civilizational institutions like healthcare and education and workers' rights guarantees and wages and middle class home ownership rates. We're not seeing that come together, despite the fact that we are a developed and settled country. And that's, I think, totally opposite from what we should be at right now. Like, our income distribution should be getting more and more equal right now. Our society should be becoming more and more efficient rather than just completely productive. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Hopefully next time we can debate a topic that's not as abstract as this.
Sure.
All right, can I give the closing statement here?
Okay, moderator.
All right. I know y'all haven't heard from me since the beginning of the debate, but that is because you gentlemen, have done a very profound job at not lashing out, keeping this debate very civil, and I'd like to congratulate both of you for that. Uh, yeah, this is the first time I've ever been in a debate where, people weren't fucking clawing at each other and at each other's necks, and it
Southern
didn't, at times,
gentlemen.
it seemed like it was
Southern
more so of a
gentleman, of
discussion
course.
than a debate, but yeah, congratulations to the both of you, and I guess we'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you for moderating too.
Thank you, Devin.
You're welcome.
Alrighty, so Bobby, do you mind if I post this?
I do not.
All right, so wonderful, splendid. I guess that'll be adieu. I'll see you next time.
All right. See you the next time.
Alrighty.